Oh, hey! My name is Michael and I'm a sexaholic. I'm really grateful to be here, to be able to talk with you about the steps today. I love talking about the steps. When I don't have a chance to talk about the steps enough, I feel like I want to explode. I feel like I'm just going around going. Instead of doing that, or instead of standing on top of my rooftop screaming it for all the neighbors, I'd much rather just say,
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So I got a question for you, Michael. Why do you need a visual presentation? Why can't you just talk to us like normal?
I think I'm going to have to call my sponsor about you. But anyway, it's pretty easy. The reason why I need to have it be a visual presentation is that my brain thinks like this. It's what I used to do in my job, and I love multimedia. So put your seatbelt on. It's time for a ride.
In case you're wondering, I want to make sure that everybody knows that I've been painstaking to make sure there's no triggers in this present. Well, okay, so one trigger got through, but I will not have any more triggers in it. Okay, enough of the triggers. Okay, a little background on me. I'm from Pennsylvania, love Pennsylvania. I've traveled all over the country in my job, but I really especially love Pennsylvania. When I was on the road, ironically, there was only one place I ever said that I would never live, and it was the state of Texas. Now, I want to explain that because I don't want to offend anybody, but I did work in all the different cities in Texas, and I loved every one of them. But whenever I was traveling between cities, this is what I remembered. And I tell you, I would have never, ever wanted to move to Texas. And so, interestingly enough, just last year when my wife and I retired, a friend asked me if I ever thought about moving to Texas. And I said, oh my goodness, no, I will never live in Texas. And he said, have you ever looked at East Texas? I said, no, I've never heard of East Texas. He said, look it up. Well, I was amazed. East Texas sold me, so I had to tell y'all.
Well, what can I say? I'm now a Texan.
I've been given 20 years of sobriety in SA and have been given 38 years sobriety in AA, and I'm very grateful for both. But I want to make sure it's very clear from the get-go that I'm not bragging, I'm not boasting, that these years of sobriety were given to me and that I don't want to take credit for them. In fact, I do want to say that God spoils me. You know how sometimes you're at a meeting and they give a coin out and somebody might say, how did you do it? Well, I didn't do it. He did. God did it. I didn't. And I just want to be clear on that because it's not about me. This presentation is not about me, even though I'll be telling my story. The topic is why working the steps is important. It's actually one of the brochures from SA, and it's a great brochure. It's a very simple way to explain to a newcomer how the steps work and why it's so important to work them. But I relate to the brochure so much because my sponsor used to talk about this a lot. You know how the old carousels that they used to have where you'd ride around and then you'd reach for the brass ring. My sponsor used to talk about that a lot, reaching for the brass ring or keep your eye on the prize. So I have a problem, and the problem is simple. It's me. I'm broken. I have no power against lust. So if my problem is me, what's the solution? Well, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. So if I don't have any power and he has all the power, I need to get a relationship with him, right? In their essence, the steps give us a spiritual awakening so that we realize at some point that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves, okay? So if I have no power and he has all the power, I want some, right? It'd be like if my cell phone was about to die from lack of battery power, I would want to plug it into the wall. So that's what the steps do. Our entire purpose with the steps is to obtain and nurture and nourish a relationship with our higher power so that when we have a problem, he's there for us. My first SA sponsor used to do one really cool thing with me is that after meetings, he would ask me what I thought about the meeting and that we would discuss it. He wasn't trying to get me to be snobbish or judgmental. He was really trying to get me to be discerning. I mean, let's face it, some meetings are better than other meetings, right? Some speakers are better than other speakers. Some shares are better than other shares. So his point was he wanted me to get used to paying attention to what people were saying and the message that was being communicated. Good example of this is he asked me early on if I would go with him to go hear an old-timer speak. This man had 12 years, and I was very grateful to have the opportunity to go hear this man speak. And afterwards, we were driving home, and he said, "What did you think?" And I said, "I really liked it." He said, "What did you like about it?" I said, "Well, the guy was knowledgeable and insightful. He really understood his addiction." And he said, "Yes, but was he happy?" And I had to think about that one. I said, "No. I don't think that's an adjective I would have used, that he didn't seem happy to me." My sponsor said something I'll always remember. He said, "When I get 12 years sobriety, I want to be happy." He talked about that a lot. When I was acting out, I didn't say, "I want to join SA so that I can be happy." When I was acting out, I said, "I want this pain to stop. I want this nightmare to stop." So we may not join for the purpose of being happy, but if we work the steps the way they're supposed to be worked, we will become happy. It's inevitable. My sponsor used to point out that the book clearly says we are sure that God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. And he always would stress, we have found much of heaven and we have been rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence. He asked me once what makes for a good meeting. And I thought about it and I said, well, I guess you'd want to be hospitable and have the books out, right? Chairs out. You'd want to open on time. And he said, that's correct. However, it would help us if we looked at what the early meetings were about. Early meetings back in like 1938, before the big book was even written, were simply people getting together every night to revel in how happy they were to be free from their addiction, but also about how they could get the word out to more people. And then once a week, they would have a meeting where they would open it up and invite many, many people to come who would bring their problems. The focus was on the solution. My sponsor used to always tell me that meetings were not meant to be a dumping ground. He grabbed me after a meeting once and he said, "You threw up on that meeting." And I said, I know. He said, you can't just go into a meeting and just start telling them what a bad day you had. You have to have a solution. And he's right. It was an important reminder. And it would really frustrate him whenever he'd talk about a let's get current meeting, right? I was at a meeting like that a few years ago. It was really kind of funny to me because everybody was complaining. It was like, who was having the worst day? And it went around and I raised my hand and I said, "Hey everyone, Michael, Sexaholic. I'm really grateful to be here. Let me tell you, I have great news." And they all stared at me. And I said, "Everything that's been shared on in the last 5-10 minutes, I've lived through. And I've gotten through pretty easily through working the 12 steps. The 12 steps don't take away my problems. The 12 steps give me tools to work with my problems. So they don't make my life perfect. They just help me to deal with life on life's terms." And I said, "I'm just so very grateful to be here and to be sober and to have learned that in my life because I want to share that with you." And that's it. And there was this silence, and people were just staring at me. And this one guy, he says, "You're freaking me out, man." I thought that was hilarious. "You're freaking me out, man." So let me tell you about my story real quick, is that I did feel when I was growing up inadequate, unworthy, alone, afraid. My insides never matched what I saw on the outsides of others. I came to feel disconnected from parents, from peers, from myself, and I tuned out. So the words that are in the white book are exactly what happened in my life. I always felt odd. I found porn as a young boy, obsessed about women all throughout school. In high school, though, I found a lot of frustration in my life because I had this craving, this lust that had been building inside me, but I didn't have what you might call a healthy outlet. I must not have been paying attention much in school and church when I was growing up about sex, because I look back now and I read those readings and I think how beautiful it is. But back then, all I heard was
No, 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 and no.
And a couple more years go by. I'm in college now. 1979, a movie came out starring Bill Murray. In that movie, he plays the part of a camp counselor. And in the scene you're about to see, it's the night before the big intramural Olympic finals. And so Bill Murray is trying to get his team psyched up. And this is the essence of his pep talk.
It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I tell you, it just doesn't matter. 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 It doesn't.
Now, when that movie came out in 1979, I was a sophomore at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, and I was also a member of the Gamma Phi fraternity. And that chant became our chant. That chant became our call to action. And it was really kind of funny. The chant would usually start at one of our keg parties near the keg, and people would very quietly start chanting, "It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter." And then it would build, and we'd all be frothing out the mouths, pounding on the walls and stomping on the floor. It was pretty funny. But where I thought I found freedom,
But they'll never take our freedom.
I actually found license to do anything I wanted, with anyone I wanted, anywhere I wanted, with whatever I wanted. And with that as my guiding principle, it was really just a couple years before I hit bottom. I went into a nosedive. So in 1982, I joined AA, and getting the alcohol and drugs out of the way was very good because it made it very obvious to me that lust was the issue. And I would end up spending the next few years saying, am I? Am I not? Am I? Am I not? Am I? Am I not? Until finally, I hit a moment of clarity. But let me tell you about my acting out. I want to explain. This is a graphic that shows how my addiction progressed. So, for instance, just as an example, I didn't want to be graphic in detail or anything. So if I were to say I would do this, but I would never do this, okay, I would do that once, but I would never do it again. Okay, I would do that on a regular basis, but I would never, ever do this. And on and on and on. And it built like that until I had hit my bottom. It was just silly for me to think that I had any type of control over this. I want to tell you what a typical day was like for me back then. This is back in 1990, 91. I would lay my head on the pillow at the end of the night and I would say, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I just spent an entire day thinking about sex. I wasted an entire day thinking about sex. And then I would vow, tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow I won't act out. I won't look at porn. I won't flirt. I won't obsess. I won't fantasize. And then I would go to sleep. Well, the next morning I would wake up, and before my coffee was even finished brewing in the microwave, I would immediately start flipping channels on the television looking for triggers. In the shower, getting ready for work, in the walk-in closet. This was before the internet, so I had magazines stashed all around. I had magazines in my briefcase, so on the trip into work, I'd be looking at the magazines. I'd be flirting with the women in the cars driving next to me. Get to work, I was so excited to see which cars were going to be there. So that means I would get to visit those offices that day and flirt with the women. I would scan the parking lot for these cars. I worked in an office setting at that time, so I would plan my day so that I would end up visiting each of those offices throughout the day to flirt with those particular women. This went on and on for a few years, and I was just beside myself with guilt and shame. All I thought about was sex. It's all I was motivated by. I'm actually surprised I was able to get raises and promotions. Well, I tell you, you cannot live with that much guilt and shame without it affecting you. And it really did affect me. I started being in more and more of a bad mood all the time. And I was angry and started turning into hatred. I started hating myself and hating everyone around me. All I wanted was to just be left alone so that I could act out. And then it happened. I hit my moment of clarity. That was July of 1991. This is the moment I realized that the reason why I was in a bad mood all the time and the reason why things were not going well for me, all the bad stuff that was happening in my life, was simply because I had been acting out. So as soon as I realized that, I immediately called my friend up in AA, the first guy who ever told me about SA. And I said, hey, you know what? I've been doing this and this and this and this for years. This feels just like beer. Do you think this might be like beer? And he said, oh my goodness, yes. He said, this is exactly like beer. He said, you're a sexaholic. You need to go to SA. It's in the phone book. I'm thrilled that he was that direct with me because I needed to hear those words. And I've been going to meetings ever since. Full disclosure, I did act out after 10 years. So that's why I have 20 instead of 30. But I don't want to get into that right now for this video. That's for a whole nother topic. So why working the steps is important. This really is the biggest aha moment of my entire 12-step life. Got a question for you. If you're ever at a meeting and you hear the following statement, who is the statement usually referring to? You're the most important person in the room. It's a newcomer, right? It's a common expression people say whenever a newcomer is around. They say, you're the most important person in the room. My sponsor used to point out that if that person is the most important person in the room, what message are they hearing? And they do hear many different messages. Okay, so I just want to narrow this down so that we can understand what's most important. If you're ever at a birthday meeting, they sometimes will sing happy birthday, right? And at the end, they'll sing, happy birthday to you, keep coming back, and don't act out, and read the book, and call your sponsor, and work the steps. And I've heard this before, and it's really kind of funny, but that's the type of thing that narrows down exactly my point that I'm trying to make, is that a newcomer will hear so many messages when they come to an SA meeting. What is the most important one? We'll take that a little step further. The SA 12-step program of recovery is different from exercise. I know that sounds really goofy, but let me explain. When I was sober just a couple months, a gentleman came in, a newcomer, and he was a fitness buff. And whenever he would share, he would talk about how grateful he was that he was sober because he was able to work out better. And he talked about how his numbers were down, his cholesterol was down, his weight was down, his heart rate was down. And then he would talk about how many reps he was able to do and how many laps he was able to swim. And his energy and enthusiasm got me thinking. So I went up to my sponsor and I said, hey, I was thinking about joining a gym and I was thinking about quitting smoking. And my sponsor immediately saw through what was happening. And he said, okay. This is about that new guy, isn't it? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, he brought it up. And he said, okay, let me just make sure this is very, very clear to you. There is nothing wrong with quitting smoking or joining a gym. He said, if you do, hats off to you. That's wonderful. He said, but I want to be clear, that is not working the 12-step program of recovery. He wanted to drill that into my brain. He said, you can go to a gym. You can go ahead and stop smoking, but don't feel like, okay, I'm working a really good 12-step program because I can do this many repetitions. It was really a very good point that he made, but it was something that he needed to really drill home with me because I could have gone off track there. All right, here's a bigger one. The 12-step program of recovery is different from therapy. Now, let me explain that because I know some people take that really personally, okay? So I want to make sure that we keep in mind our premise. If the newcomer is the most important person in the room, what message are they hearing? And I would never want a newcomer to come into a meeting hearing these types of words and think that that's the 12-step program of recovery. Because let's face it, self-knowledge is not the answer. Knowing more about why I acted out is not going to help me stay sober. A perfect explanation of this is from the AA book, Pass It On, talking about Bill W.'s early days of sobriety. In it, there's a story about Armistice Day, 1934. This is Bill W.'s very last drinking bout, the day it started. He had just gotten out of Towns Hospital in New York. Towns Hospital was for alcoholism treatment. And it was headed up by Dr. William D. Silkworth, who was the writer of the doctor's opinion in the big book. Bill left the hospital feeling 100%. He understood his addiction more than he ever understood before, and he was ready to live life as a sober man. Couple weeks go by, and it's Armistice Day. That's what they used to call Veterans Day. And Bill had off from work. He was a stockbroker, and they closed down the stock exchange, so Bill couldn't go into work that day. His wife, Lois, did have to work. She worked in a department store. So she goes off. He's now by himself, and he starts to get a little squirrely, if you know what I mean. He starts to feel that, oh my goodness, I may need a drink pretty soon if I don't find something to do. So he decides to pick up his old bag of golf clubs and go golfing down at Staten Island. He takes a bus down to Staten Island, and on the bus he becomes pretty friendly with this one guy. And they get to talking, and all of a sudden, boom, there's an accident. Somebody hits the bus. Nobody was hurt, but the bus could not go on, so they had to get everybody off the bus, and they were all standing outside waiting for the next bus when the guy, Bill's new friend, notices what he thinks is a speakeasy, and he says, "Hey, you want to go over there and have a drink?" And Bill says, "Sure, why not?" So they go in, and they sit down. The guy orders a scotch, and Bill orders a ginger ale. And the guy questions it. "Hey, you don't drink?" And Bill says, "No, I can't drink anymore. I'm alcoholic." And the guy says, "Really?" And Bill says, "Yep, I'm alcoholic, and I can never ever drink safely again. For me, alcohol is poison. And I was just in the hospital, and they told me why I drank and why I could never drink again and what it does to my body. I have an allergy of the body combined with an obsession of the mind, and I will never be able to drink safely again." And the guy said, "Wow, that's fantastic. Good for you." Somebody makes an announcement. "The replacement bus is here. Everyone has to get back on board." So they all get back on this second bus, and now they're off again on their way to Staten Island. When they pull up at their final destination, Bill and his friend go to shake hands goodbye when his friend notices that it's lunchtime. So he says, "Hey, Bill, why don't we go in here and have a bite to eat for lunch?" So they go into the local restaurant. They're sitting there at the restaurant, and the guy orders a scotch and a sandwich. Bill orders a ginger ale and a sandwich. And they're sitting there and they're talking and they're laughing, right? They're enjoying each other's company. And right then, the owner of the bar comes over with drinks. And he puts them in front of the two men and he says, "Drink up, boys. It's Armistice Day. These are on the house." And without hesitation, Bill W. picked up his drink and drank it straight down. And his new friend said, "What are you doing? You just told me a few minutes ago that you can never safely drink again. You must be crazy." And Bill thought about it, and he answered, "Yes, I am." And that was the beginning of Bill's last drinking bout before he got sober. It's also the reason why in the AA Big Book it clearly says, "But the actual or potential alcoholic with hardly an exception will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge." This is the point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home to our alcoholic readers. So the 12-step program of recovery is different from exercise, it's different from therapy, it's also different from religion. Remember our premise. If the newcomer's the most important person in the room, what message are they hearing? We have to be careful not to mention specifics of our religions or our higher powers' names, for instance, because we wouldn't want to confuse a newcomer and make them think that they've joined a religion as opposed to a 12-step program. Let's talk about the differences. Religion has more to do with liturgical worship or rituals. It has to do with an afterlife, a soul. There are specific moral teachings, a very specific higher power. In 12-step meetings, we talk about spiritual principles, spiritual growth, how we want to become happy, joyous, and free, how we're usefully whole. And 12-step programs are very pluralistic, right? So we've got many different religions. Now, I used to be anti-religion. In fact, I disliked all religions, and I used to be rude about it. I was proud on surveys, for instance, to check off none because I just didn't want to be involved with any formal organized religion. I called myself for a while, a recovering Catholic or an anti-Catholic. And I used to confront people at meetings, in fact, about their religions. I was kind of rude about it for a while. I didn't like that at all about myself. I even, at one point, and I hate saying this, but my mom and I were having an argument once about religion, and I said to my own mother, I said, "F the church." So suffice it to say, I have had to make quite a number of amends over the years regarding that topic. As I said, most 12-step meetings have many different religions in them, and so we need to be careful about how we word things. Getting ready for this presentation, I was thinking about all the different types of religions I've worked with over the years, and I have to tell you a funny story about one in particular. I was at my old home group meeting. This here is a picture of where the oldest meeting in the Philadelphia Intergroup is. I was sitting there getting ready for the meeting to start when in the door walked an Orthodox Jew, and I could tell from the clothes he was wearing, and I shook his hand. I said, "Welcome, have a seat, let's talk." He told me that he lived about an hour and a half from us and that he had heard that we had a good meeting, so he came over to say hello. So we got along very well. And he started bringing in friends, and his friends started bringing in friends. And sure enough, about a few months later, one night we had 18 Orthodox Jews at our meeting. And I thought that was the funniest thing in the world, that at this United Methodist Church, we had all these Orthodox Jews at our meeting. So we were all standing outside that night after the meeting, all standing outside in the parking lot, laughing as you might after a meeting. And one of the guys says, "Hey, Michael, there's a lot of cars driving by. What if one of them pulled over and asked you, why are all those men standing there dressed like that in front of a United Methodist church?" And I said, "Oh, that's easy. I'll just tell them that we're here for a rehearsal for Fiddler on the Roof." I was a pretty hardcore agnostic when I joined AA back in 1982, and my sponsor was a minister. He and I talked a lot about is there or is there not a God. His point was simple. It couldn't be more logical. He would say to me, when you think about how complicated life is and how it miraculously begins in such a beautiful way, but not just human life, plant life, animals, insects, birds. He said, if all of that can start in such a beautiful way, how can there not be a God directing all this? And not just life on the planet, but the planet itself. All the different systems, the ecosystems, all working together. And not just our planet, but how our planet works with all the other planets and how the gravitational pulls all work together with each other. And not even our solar system, but our galaxy and how that works with other galaxies. The scientists at Hubble did a great experiment where they took the world's largest telescope and they focused it on a blank spot in space. This is one that previously no one had ever seen any stars there before. And they left the camera shutter open for 11 days. And at the end of 11 days, they found out something remarkable. They didn't just find a new star, which would have been cool, or a new galaxy, which would have been pretty amazing. No, at the end of 11 days, they found over 10,000 galaxies. After having one of these conversations on the ride home from a meeting, my sponsor turned to me and said, "Well, it's now time for your third step." And I said, "Oh no, I'm not praying in front of you. I'm not even sure if it works yet. And you're a professional prayer." And he egged me on for a while until he finally gave up. And he said, "Okay, I'll let you get out of the car, but I need to challenge you. When you go in your apartment, go ahead and close the door, lock it, and then kneel down." He said, "All I'm asking is for you to verbally acknowledge that there is something out there that's more powerful than you. You can use whatever words you want." He said, "Can you do that?" And I said, Yes, I can." So I did. I walked in my apartment, closed the door, locked it, knelt down. And then I spoke almost as if I was talking into a microphone. I leaned forward. I said, "Hello? Tom told me to try this, so I don't know how this works. I don't even know who you are or if you can hear me, but I thought I would try. So here I am, and thanks. Bye." That's a true story. That was my first prayer as an adult. Well, later that evening, the most amazing thing happened. I was sitting there. I figured I would read from the Bible just to see what I've been missing. And while I was reading, the room got very, very bright. And I felt at that moment a presence, a friendly presence, somebody who I knew had been taking care of me all along. And that the only reason I was sober that day is because he allowed it. Well, that next morning, I was convinced that something was out there, so I called Tom and I said, well, I guess I need to pray, right? And he laughed. He said, yes, 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 you do need to pray. And that's when he told me the story about Frank Amos and his report. The story comes to us from Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. In the very early days of AA, Bill W. went on a campaign to go get some money. He went to speak to philanthropists around the country, and one of them was J.D. Rockefeller. So he told Rockefeller all about the group of sober alcoholics up in Akron, Ohio, and Rockefeller was very intrigued. He turned to his associate, Frank Amos, who is not a member, and he asked him if he would go fly to Akron and find out exactly who these alcoholics were and how they got sober. Amos agreed, and he was on his way. While in Akron, he interviewed people, he watched the meetings, and he learned. He got his report ready, and he came back to J.D. Rockefeller to present. And this is the essence of the Frank Amos report. One, that they would have to give up all alcohol, clearly, and that's a no-brainer. Secondly, they'd have to surrender to God completely. Third, they'd have to remove all sins from their lives. I thought that it was interesting that the one sin they mentioned was adultery. Also, that they would make an effort to help others. Then, I thought this was interesting. Notice the difference in emphasis. Important, but not vital. Okay, so important, but not vital. They had to meet with each other frequently. And important, but not vital, again, important but not vital, they attend some type of religious service once a week. Then the clincher, I love this one. The alcoholic must have devotions every morning, a quiet time of prayer and some reading from the Bible and other religious literature. And then it said, unless this is faithfully followed, there is a grave danger of backsliding. There's only one problem with that. That's asking me to have quiet time. I almost felt like saying, quiet time? What's that? I wasn't doing very well with quiet time back then. And in fact, I have a very active imagination. And many, many times I get distracted. I get so distracted, this is me.
You have my undivided attention.
I went through a period where I was trying to stump my sponsor by asking him funky questions. This is one of them. I used to say, well, what if my higher power wants me to fail? What if he wants me to drink and act out? What if he wants me to carouse? And that way I could be a really good example to other people about how not to be. And he laughed, of course, and he asked me a question back, one that I've stolen from him and I've used many, many times for my sponsees. He asked me, Michael, how big is your God? He would explain it like this. Your addiction is 1,000 times more powerful than you are. If there's a battle between you and your addiction, you're going to die. But God is infinitely more powerful than your addiction. So if the addiction's 1,000 times more powerful than we are, and God is infinitely more powerful than our addiction, if there's a battle to be had, I'd rather it be between my addiction and God, and not my addiction and me. And during your quiet time, he would tell me, do not act like God is a Santa Claus or a genie in a lamp. It's not like he's there to gimme, do this, help me. In fact, follow the logic here. I know what I want. I always know what I want. That's really simple. God knows what I want. God always knows what I want. So if I know what I want and God knows what I want, I don't really have to spend a lot of time telling him that. What's missing, though? What does God want in my life? And there's one way to start to get to know for sure, and that's in quiet. I remember hearing it once called the School of Silence. I love that. So I'm not going to hear what God wants if I'm the one doing the talking. Remember the old story about Elijah and how he couldn't hear God in the tempest and the storms and the earthquake and the thunder and lightning? He heard him in the gentle breeze. That's where I need to listen, in the gentle breeze. A friend of mine in the fellowship taught me a Hebrew word. The word is hineni. And the word means basically, here I am, Lord. As in, here I am, Lord, I've come to do your will. As in, reporting for duty, sir, right? If I think of my prayer time as, I'm just here to get my marching orders, what do you need me to do for you today? Then I'm giving God a chance to get a word in edgewise. My rule is that nothing else can be happening at that moment. I'm talking no radio, no trying to wake up, no shower, no television, no reading, no driving, no packing the lunch for the kids. It has everything to do with just sitting still listening. Now, 5 minutes is so easy. Anyone can do that. And how very, very important it is for me to try. Think of it like, I love you, God, so much that I want to spend these 5 minutes with you, and I'm going to listen to you no matter what you have to tell me. And God at the same time is saying, I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some time with me. I'm delighting in your presence. Do you know who else was a big fan of this quiet time? It was Dr. Bob. When somebody asked him once what his favorite thing to do in 12-step recovery, he said it was the quiet time in the morning. So to wrap up, if the steps are not about exercise or therapy or religion, what are they about? Why is it so important for us to work the 12 steps? Okay, here's SA's 12-step program of recovery in a nutshell. This is the ideal. Our relationship with God is unimpeded. The reason this clear communication between us and our higher power is ideal is because when we need His help, we simply ask, and He's there for us. But that's not our reality, is it? We innately have things that block us from Him. Our defects of character. Some people work on them and grow into mature adults. Others, I'm referring to addicts, of course, cover them up. Lusting, drinking, eating, gambling, etc. Then, when we hit bottom, we enter the rooms. We feel better, temporarily, until we don't. Then, a newcomer might think the problem is in the fellowship itself. Some might look around, getting misdirected. Books, hobbies, therapy, working out, etc. Again, none of those are bad. They're just not the 12-step program. When we work the steps on our defects and clear up the wreckage of our past, we obtain that all-important spiritual awakening that is so critical, literally, and begin to nourish that ideal relationship with our higher power. It's simple, and it really works, if you work it. So, work it, you're worth it. Well, that's all the time we have for now. If you're ever in Tyler, Texas, please stop by and say hello, okay? And be sure to book your hotel rooms now, because even though Tyler SA is only a few months old, we'll be hosting the SA International Convention in just 30 years from now. Hope to see you all there. Thanks.